Welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast, presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the podcast, host Craig Jeffery sits down with Chris Clausen, Executive Director of Product Management at Deluxe Corporation, to discuss practices and plans for modernizing and automating accounts payable and accounts receivable processes. They examine the influence of recent disruptions, the calibration of various pain points that drive change, and other motivators. Listen into the discussion to find out more.
Welcome to the Treasury Update Podcast, Chris. I'm glad to have you here.
Hi, Craig. Thanks for having me today. We always appreciate getting on with you guys and getting an opportunity to talk about the state of the industry. So thank you very much for having us today.
We are going to be talking about modernizing AP, and this is the discussion, has at its base, and it extends beyond the base, a discussion of the survey, the Modernizing AP survey. I wanted to give the listeners just a little bit of background about what took place with the survey. This was the second annual survey underwritten by Deluxe, run by Strategic Treasurer. It ran during the middle of March and finished in the middle of May 2021. There was over 150 respondents. 84% were corporates. And so it ran just about 6 weeks. There was 50 questions, a little over 50 questions. No individual had to answer that many questions because the survey branched if you were a banker or a service provider versus if you were a corporate practitioner. So the vast majority of the respondents were corporate practitioners. It covered a number of areas, from pain points in the AP world to the move to fully electronic. It discussed what drove people to automation, any blocking activities. It also measured plans to move to a hybrid environment or a fully outsourced environment or back away from that, as well as attitudes and perspectives across much of AP. So the survey was quite comprehensive, and we'll factor in some of these points during today's discussion. But I wanted to give that as background. So everybody who's listening who took the survey, thank you so much. And thank you, Chris and Deluxe, for underwriting this seminal survey. It's a great piece of research that gives us such good information. But Chris, I wanted to start talking about the drivers to automation. What moves people to automation in the AP world? And, as a context to that, so, feel free to answer, what drives people to automation, but also the perspective of what do you see and how would you describe when an organization is fully or highly automated? Is this a spectrum? Is this a binary on-off, you're fully automated or not? And then as you're talking about that, maybe you could factor in some of the points that inhibit this activity, that block this activity. So, factor in what we've learned from the survey, but also you're in the space all the time talking and running the business in this area. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the drivers to automation.
Great, Craig. I could go on and on about this. There's a ton of really interesting insight that came out of the survey that we did. And, there's some themes that emerged, right, in terms of what does it mean to be fully automated. But if I lean particularly on my experience looking at, the 4 million businesses that Deluxe services, and those businesses span all the way from micro, small businesses, all the way up to large Fortune 500 businesses. There's some common themes that emerge there as well. But even for highly automated businesses in the electronic payments space, there's usually a variety of solutions being used to accomplish that state. And even the most automated ones out there that we see in terms of businesses who have adopted electronic payments and are utilizing them wherever they can, even those that are at the cutting edge of that front and have determined to eliminate paper-based payments still have paper-based payments that they're issuing. And there's some reasons for that, right? very few electronic solutions out there meet the need for all of the different use cases that need to be served. And so each electronic solution out there has strengths and it has some drawbacks. And so the ones that are highly automated typically have adopted multiple electronic payment solutions to meet the breadth of their use case requirements. But even those that are at the what I would qualify as the highly automated end aren't there. And one of the best examples I can give is in the medical payments industry. We get large healthcare insurers that say, "Yep, we're heavily automated or fully automated with electronic payment." What they're talking about is dollars. A lot of the dollars that they pay actually are electronic. But if you look at the number of transactions, there's still a long tail of paper-based transactions. And that kind of naturally leads into the second part of your question that you asked about, what are some of the blockers, right, that block companies from being able to go to a highly automated or fully automated electronic payment solution? There's a number of them. First and foremost is that a lot of the solutions out there don't solve for all the use cases, right? So they have to go through a process of implementing multiple solutions. There are other issues too. IT resources are always at a premium, right? And particularly during times in a pandemic like we see now, they're even more strained to deliver all the different components that are needed across the business, not just for payments. Management has a lot of competing priorities, right? Payments are one of them. The pandemic brought a lot of focus on that, right? With the disruption to normal AP processes. But the pandemic also disrupted other things too. Logistics, operations, supplies, staffing, all the different things. So when you look across an organization, there's only so many calories that can be spent for initiatives across the board. And electronic payment automation is competing against other really pressing needs. So that's a blocker. And then the last piece is articulating an ROI. We see this particularly at the larger business end of the spectrum. So as you get larger, you need to be able to articulate the spend you're going to output to initiate the electronic payments and integrate. And that ROI isn't always clear, or it's really expensive, right? A lot of these solutions that are out there in the market require significant change, whether it's integration effort into your ERP system or potentially process change, all of those things. So there's a lot of different blockers out there, and being able to articulate ROI, being able to get this up the list in terms of priority, being able to grab those precious IT resources, those are all things that any business is going to be challenged with, whether you're a small business using an off-the-shelf accounting software all the way up to a Fortune 500. So, that's some of what we see, Craig.
Good information that you shared there and some insights. It made me think of something else. I was going to ask you about, how far along the financial supply chain makes an organization, automated. Is it end to end within an organization, or does it go to the other organization? Your payables is someone else's receivables, and do we need to think about that as end to end internally to end to the external organization? And I was thinking about that in terms of the width of the automation, but you brought up an interesting point when you brought up healthcare. You talked about, hey, some people say we're highly automated, and they've automated the transfer of value, but not the movement of information. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on this that relates to the width or the depth, or however you describe the other organizations, involving their organizations as part of that, and how much of that is making sure it's not bifurcating information, the trade or the activity, the settlement, the financial settlement, and the information that helps close the loop.
Yeah, you're making great points as always. If you think about the difference between consumer payments and business payments, particularly, business payments require robust remittance data. And to the degree that that data can travel with the payment from both a timing perspective and even within the payment envelope itself, that makes a big difference from a reconciliation standpoint. And so different payees and payers across the spectrum have different degrees of competency level in being able to digest that data in electronic format. Different payment rails support remittance data going with the payment to differing degrees. That's part of the reason why you see them leveraged in different use cases. So when you talk about, the bifurcation of payments and remittance, you're really getting to one of the core challenges to true electronic automation. Some of the payment solutions out there are focused on the funds and the movement of the funds versus the movement of the remittance data that go with the funds. And where those two start to separate, you're actually adding reconciliation costs to the payee. And you're going to create a friction point for the payee to actually adopt the electronic solution that you want to adopt. So it's really important to understand that these things go together in business payments, and the folks who have successfully navigated these waters understand with the different electronic payment solutions that they're bringing to bear within their organization. They understand their payee group well enough to understand what their limitations are. They understand preferences of those payees, and they're leveraging solutions that give choice, that work well within existing AP solutions and infrastructure. And we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure, but you're shining a light on exactly one of the big challenges to preventing full automation.
You mentioned the ROI, and sometimes ROI is I don't want to call it perfunctory. I do want to call it perfunctory exercise that may be just pushed by the controllers group to say, or finance says, you've got to create this return on investment, which is made up of, different parts, fiction, and other parts, wish. And that is a way of supposedly force ranking what gets done. But there's usually some type of management priorities that come about, and that's only one factor that goes into it. But when we look at the blockers from the survey, what were the biggest blockers to becoming highly automated? 42% said it was management priorities, 41% IT availability. Those two are massive and really significant. And the third point, which is the one you also highlighted, was financial payback or ROI of automation. That was 35%. Those are the big three that delay this type of activity. So really interesting points. I don't know if you have anything more on that, because I want to talk about getting, moving past the blockers and moving to fully electronic. I don't know if anything else to close out that section as we conceptually move to the other piece.
Yeah, I think we hit the big three there, Craig, and there are some other blockers as you move down the list, but if you're going to be an organization that is successful in going electronic, you're going to have to knock those top three off. And the other ones are more specific to certain industries, things like that. So I think you did a good job of highlighting the big three there.
When you talk about IT availability and scarce resources, management can have the priorities, maybe even the funds for resources. But if you don't have the ability to make it happen, that stops. It stops things, delays things, and there may or may not be an opportunity. So, yeah, thanks for sharing both information from the survey and from your experience. Now, as we talk about the movement to fully electronic, the first question is, why does it really matter? Well, why is this important to move to being fully electronic, either inside your organization or between your organization and the others?
So that's an important question, right? Because that starts to help any payments professional articulate why they need to do this within their business. And if you really think about it, before I get into some of the specific reasons, just big picture, payments have been a commodity for this industry for the last several decades. There's not a lot of ways to differentiate based on payments, or there have historically not been a lot of ways to differentiate using payments. But because there is an inflection point with technology now catching up to the underlying business needs, there actually is an opportunity for a business to differentiate itself based on payments. And that'll be true for a while, for years, because if you look across the spectrum, these capabilities are going to improve a number of things. And this is going to the heart of your question, right? The obvious one is cost structure, right? It's going to give a business an advantage around where it is improving its margins, driving cost out of administrative tasks and operational tasks that don't necessarily provide a ton of extra value to the business. That expense can be reinvested into the business. So the cost savings that fully electronic payments bring to a business are important. In addition to that, it also greatly reduces exception processing. And while exception processing also has a cost element to it, right? Because every time there's an exception, you are employing staff or FTE to help resolve it. It's also a brand and experience perspective, because for every exception that you have a party who is likely unhappy with how that payment is currently resolving. So if you think about those two items, from a branding and from a cost perspective, that's important. But then if you also look at the ability to control your outputs and your inputs, your AR and your AP, the receivables and payables, there's a huge cash flow impact to electronic payments. You now have control up to the minute as to when you make a payment. You can hold on to those funds till the very last second. You can wait until the payment is actually due to make it. You don't have to try to predict lead times and pad your payment time frame. In addition to that, you can see definitively where it is in its actual journey. Has the payment been received? Has it settled? All of those things give you a lot of insight into your cash flow. And on the receivable side, there's equally a number of really great benefits from a cash flow perspective. So as you look at why it's so important to leverage these capabilities, cash flow, brand and experience, and then cost, right? Those are the big three that immediately come to mind. That any business that is out there looking for an advantage, and most businesses are, right? It's a competitive world out there. If you can impact your cost structure, if you can impact your brand, and you can manage your cash flow better, those are huge competitive advantages in a marketplace.
That the way you describe the defects or exceptions impacting the brand was really interesting, because lately I've been thinking about that as defect or defect management. Every exception is due to some problem, right? You didn't pass information, something was done wrong, data was keyed or whatever. Every exception is extraordinarily costly to the brand, like you said, and it can impact cash flow. It impacts the safety. And the way you were describing this brand was really, really interesting, because I've been thinking lately so much about what adds cost. Well, defects. What cause defects? Manual processes and broken processes. And yeah, the impact flows to the brand. It flows to the cash flow. I liked how you described that.
Yeah, and one of the most frequent use cases we see for exceptions is just an inquiry on the status. Where is my payment? I haven't got it yet. That is hugely expensive, having to answer those questions, right? And electronic payments can give both the payor and the payee an do-it-yourself, self-serve ability to see what the status of the payment is, so that you don't have to answer that question as the payer anymore. So it's amazing how much expense goes into just supporting where's my payment.
Yeah, that's a good example. I'm going to see if you have any stories that provide an example or a teaching moment on these categories. But first off, I want to probe into what you said on the cash flow improvement side. I'll ramble a little bit first with some comments on that, maybe to set it up so it's not an easy question. I don't want to give you a softball. I want to make it harder. Well, if you can say, I send my payment later exactly when I want to, that gives you control of your cash flow, but it's still a zero-sum game between you and who you're paying to some extent. If it's, you're transferring today, you're transferring 3 days from now. How would you describe that as a cash flow improvement? Given, maybe expanding beyond the limited way I try to paint you into a corner on that.
So think about it on the payer side first, then we'll talk the payee or recipient side second. On the payer side, what would happen under the legacy world is they would have to send out the payment well in advance of the due date to ensure that they would meet that requirement, right? In some cases, I'll go back to my healthcare example because that one's industry ripe for electronification. They would have service level agreements and regulatory obligations to get a payment out the door and prove that the payment was received within a certain period of time. So they would lead that payment cycle well before it was actually due. And by doing that, those payments would be received, processed, and settled long before that money was needed. So if you think about it, you're actually making the payment earlier than you need to. That cash is now gone out of your accounts before you actually needed to send it out. So from a cash retention and a liquidity standpoint, electronic payables give you an opportunity to improve your liquidity, which from a cash flow perspective is important, particularly when there are unexpected expenses. From a receivable side, that same structure gives you the opportunity to accelerate cash flow. So you can offer terms within the electronic payment where you say, I'll discount to get the payment in earlier, and that is much easier to manage and administrate within an electronic payment than it is within a traditional legacy paper-based payment, right, where you've got a lot more communication barriers and timing challenges to effectively realize those benefits. You can also delay making payments as a payer. You can offer to pay more past the deadline, right? So there's all kinds of opportunities that electronic payments insert into true cash flow management, which allow a business to meet its cash flow ups and downs. And if you really think about businesses, 50% of them fail in their first year because of cash flow issues. And as you go up market into the large Fortune 500s, cash flow is less important from you're going to run out of liquidity, but it's more about maximizing that liquidity. And if you can hold it longer, you can earn interest on it and things like that. So there's a lot of different angles to play here. And what electronic payments really do from a cash flow perspective is they give you the control over the timing to sufficient so that you can maximize both the interest that you're earning on the funds that you have, your liquidity on the payer side and on the receiver side when you want to drive cash in or out. And do you want to discount it because you have a pressing need for a cash inflow? Maybe you need to make payroll. Maybe you need to pay your landlord, whatever the case may be. Electronification gives you those options. The old payable methods, a lot of those, you really didn't have that control. And that's kind of the difference.
I'll give you a story that exemplifies your cash flow improvement by paying early, because some people I think are going to be skeptical and say, no, we pay when it's due. We issue the check or the ACH, etc., for the due date, so we're not paying earlier. So that may or may not be the case. But I just always remember Ronald Reagan always said, trust but verify, and it's like I never believe what management says happens. The way they think things happen and the way they happen is never 100% true. There's things that are true and accurate, but when you go and you look in an area and you talk and you see what happens, you find it's not the way they think it is. That's what they said, and that's what sort of happens. But I'll give this example. We're observing, we're doing a working capital review. The person that ran AP, it was an AP clerk who was plugging everything in, was, setting up things in the system. The system was set up to pay on due date, which was net 30 or net 45. I don't remember the example. And their biggest vendor, who they paid about $100 million a year to, he's keying the stuff into the system. As he goes to select everything for this payment run, selects his biggest customer, changes all of them to pay early, to pay when the run's going to go, quickly doing it while we're watching. I'm like, what did you do? Oh, we're moving, Acme Incorporated into the payment run. Oh, why is that? Well, one time we paid late. The CEO came and yelled at us. There was a problem, and I'm not going to get in trouble anymore.
Right. Exactly.
It's like that one person alone, because of working in a less automated environment, less electronic environment, moved up, far more changes than any one or two things that we were doing to fix the inefficient working capital. And it was just, but you wouldn't see it based on, hey, they're paying according to terms. No, they were paying earlier because of the concerns.
Well, I can tell you you're highlighting a use case that really spotlights what I believe is coming next for electronic payments. If you think about the rich data that is available through fully electronified or mostly electronified businesses, there is an opportunity to do optimization strategy around your payment strategy. And I can't tell you how many businesses that I see that if it was my AR shop or my AP shop, they'd be out the door because what they're doing is what is easiest or most comfortable for them. Sometimes they're change adverse. Sometimes it's that they don't realize that the cost of what they're doing is actually much more than the benefit of what they're getting. And this picture that the suppliers are getting, the vendors of electronic payment solutions are getting of these practices provide all kinds of opportunities for strategy optimization within payments and receivables. And I think what you're going to see the industry do is start to provide tools and data that will allow leadership to understand where not only their company's practices diverge from best practices, but also reveal a better view into those practices and what the true cost of those are. So the fact that you're highlighting that as an example, I was kind of chuckling and smiling because we see that kind of approach frequently, right? Because they've been burned once or twice, or maybe you've got a back office that's looking for low friction, the easy button, right? To process payments. And, there's a ton of wasted expenditure in the industry around AR and AP that is still available for businesses to mine and reinvest into their businesses. So that was a great example, Craig.
I think we're going to have to do another webinar in the near future about rethinking AP and explore some of those topics a little more. Yeah. That's really some good things to think about. I guess as we move on to this other category of progress, is there progress on the front of automating, progress on the front of using third-party systems, like Deluxe, like that banks offer, and is there really a movement away from in-house? And I want to go there, but I also want to, sort of do the bridge from the previous sections. What is it that you see as important for leaders, whether it's AP, finance, or even Treasury? As you look at AP, we have a lot of our audience is Treasury, and there's a link there in AP. So I want to make sure that they're paying attention too. Is what do they need to know about the benefits and about realizing the benefits, and then we'll shift into the area of leveraging third party tech firms and banks.
Yeah, you bet. So, when you take a look at the spectrum of folks that are, fully automated all the way down to those that haven't even really begun this journey yet, there are some very important things that get lost in translation. And one of those is that I need to make a leap from where I am today to an end state in one big jump. And that is very difficult to do, very challenging to do. There is a bridge path that you can take from where you are today to where you want to get to that doesn't require that upfront investment to the same levels as if you wanted to make it in one giant leap. And so as you look at some of those obstacles that were out there, whether it is the IT resources, whether it is the prioritization, things like that, it's important to understand that there's a lot of solutions on the market. And, we'll talk a little bit about some of the survey results that we saw in a minute, that is showing that this is actually happening, right? There are a lot of solutions on the market that allow you to take a bridge strategy approach to get yourself there incrementally and start to realize those benefits before you have to make a leap to that end state. And one of the benefits of that approach is you don't have to place big bets necessarily on which payment rails are going to win in the end, right? A lot of the industry is bringing a lot of new solutions to market right now. A lot of the solution providers out there kind of require you to place a bet, right, on one solution versus another. And it's important to realize that you can put a strategy together that allows you to not place those bets and still minimize your investment in infrastructure expense, integration, process change, all of those types of things. So, if I were saying one key message to your audience, there is a path to get to from where you are today to where you want to be that doesn't require you to do it in one giant leap. You can get there in stages. And by doing that, you can actually bring along your employees and your payees and accommodate some of their needs. Because the one thing we see regularly is even if you as the payer, the business that's making the payments is ready to go electronic, you have a wide variety of payees that are at all different stages of that spectrum. And you need to keep that in mind, because if you try to force that entire group to go to where you want, you're going to create some really painful friction for yourself and for them. But you can put a strategy in place that allows you to accommodate where everybody is on the spectrum and get there at their pace. And if you do that right, you'll really enjoy the benefits. We are seeing that because we have such a large customer base that we deal with. We are seeing customers that are using that strategy and being very successful at it. And that's what's driving the growth of electronic payment products. And you can see it with the speed at which they're growing. There's a reason why electronic payments is valued so highly in the marketplace today.
So I'm going to say that Chris Clausen is an incrementalist. Move in the direction of where you're going. No backtracking, but you don't have to get there in one big leap.
I think if you look at some of the strategies that the industry has tried, I think there's a lot of proof that it's a really big leap to do it in one swoop. The results speak for that. If you talk to some of the players that brought some of the really exciting new digital payment solutions to market, there's nothing inherently wrong with those solutions, but they don't have nearly the uptake that was forecasted out of the gate. And the reason for that was a lack of understanding about how big of a jump that was, and that it was going to take a staged approach to get from where you are to where you want to be.
Yeah, very good, Chris. Now let's talk about progress, and not just progress on automation, but progress, or maybe we should say movement towards, or a sprint towards outsourcing or a hybrid approach and a heavy move away from in-house. I'll just cover a couple of statistics and maybe you could talk about what you see either from the survey, from your customer base. So the movement away from doing everything in-house, whether you look at invoice, receipt processing and imaging, vendor master record management, all the way down to payment file generation, each of those works off of the majority number because the majority of that activity is done in-house. But all of them expect to see 18 up to 22% decline. In other words, move to hybrid, where there's more that's done externally, or move to more outsourcing those particular functions, or all of them. At the same time, the growth in those hybrid models or outsourced, working off a smaller number, sees a higher level of growth, but those range from 70 to 77% on invoice receipt processing, vendor master record management, down to still significant growth as a percentage for payment file generation, for example. That's 27%, 36% based on whether it's paper or electronic. So there's a big push to leverage your bank, to leverage your fintechs to make that happen. I know that makes you happy because you sell those things, but I'd love for you to give us a little more color and thoughts on that. Does it differ by industry size? I mean, just maybe you can unpack some of that.
We're seeing an acceleration in the trend, and COVID obviously had an impact on that, right? Because of the pure disruption to business's operational model. But it's bigger than just COVID. I think the industry oftentimes talks about COVID as a catalyst, and it is, but this was happening before COVID, and that acceleration curve that we were seeing was going up as we went into COVID. So as we look at our customer base, and Deluxe is somewhat uniquely positioned to see behavior changes because we're a 100-year-old check company, paper-based, in-house payment. If you think of the paper check, it's an in-house payment generated payment modality that has been around a while. So we see the purchasing and behavior patterns there, but we also are providing electronic payment solutions now. And we're seeing that same customer base make that shift across from paper-based traditional payment strategy to electronic-based. And what I can tell you is that this is happening across the board, whether you are a small business, whether you have been in business for 30 years, or whether this is your first year. If your business leadership is, generationally baby boomers, or whether it is millennials, all of those groups are making this shift. So there are some commonalities within those subgroups, and within certain industry verticals, there's different challenges, right? For healthcare, which is, I always go back to that because that's one of the most complex ecosystems that are out there in terms of solving for electronification. It's been one of the markets that has been slow to adopt electronification. If you think about the complexity of the remittance data and the formats, and you got to have a EOB along with the payment, and that EOB has to fit within 300 different formats for it to be usable by the recipient. There's a lot of different things that historically have been preventing that, but the technology at this point has caught up to the need, and those capabilities that are being brought together by industry players are creating kind of a set of solutions in the market that customers are becoming willing to adopt and use. And those that were on the bleeding edge are now on the leading edge in terms of being fully adopted. They've acted as the trailblazers for some of the ones who are going to be following here in the coming years, in terms of determining best practices, solution types, things like that. But, small businesses, they're looking for something that's going to plug and play into their accounting software. Usually that software is off the shelf. For larger businesses, they're supporting multiple payment types within multiple ERP systems. So it's important to understand that it's not a one-size-fit-all solution here. But what we are seeing is that when a business looks to its bank to help them solve this, if the bank is not ready or if it does not have enough solutions in its portfolio, they are evidencing a very strong willingness to go to a non-bank partner. And that shift is notable and visible, and they will switch banks if they're not getting what they need, even if it's not their credit bank. They will, and our survey results back that up, right? In terms of what we were seeing, it is truly an inflection point in terms of what we're seeing. But what we are seeing is success. We certainly, for our solutions, have a lot of success stories about customers that have successfully made that shift. Other solution providers have the same, right? There are great shining examples for customers who have made this journey or are in the middle of the journey and what they're experiencing. And overall, it's a pretty darn positive experience. It's why I'm excited to be a part of this industry right now, because very rarely in your career do you get the opportunity to see a sea change moment or inflection change moment like what we're seeing right now. It has happened in other industries already. It's now happening in payments, and it's a great time to be a part of that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for and breaking that out by industry as well, and some of the background on why that's the case. I want to, as we come to the end of the podcast, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to tell us any final thoughts, any seminal items to emphasize, or something new that I should have asked you.
I think the way I would sum things up is there shouldn't be a business out there that shouldn't be seriously looking at an electronification strategy. Because of the different solutions that are out there, the combinations of them that can be brought to bear, there is a path for just about every business, regardless of whether you're IT constrained, whether you've got a lot of competing priorities. You as a business can benefit from electronification no matter where you fall on that spectrum. And the last thing I'll say on that is, even if you are a business that likes to thump your chest and say we're fully automated, you're not. There is still opportunity within your payables portfolio to electronify further. And there is still significant cost sitting there, even if the bulk of your dollars are already electronic, that you can get out of your business and you can improve both your cost structure and your payees' experiences. So, regardless of where you are on the spectrum, there is opportunity there for you, and don't kid yourself that it's too hard to do. That would be kind of what I would sum up, Craig.
Yes. Yeah, there's a couple of really good quotes out of that last section. Chris, thank you so much for your time. I hope we can have you back on the Treasury Update podcast in the near future.
Thanks, Craig. We appreciate the time with you guys. You guys are always a wonder to talk to, and we very much appreciate our partnership with Strategic Treasurer.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update Podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.